me to comment or reply is to disagree with me. Like I said, I have a long-standing rule that if a comment's made and I find myself giving an answer that I think more than just the person who asked would want to know, I'm motivated to make a video on that topic. Or if I feel like I have enough to say that I'm going to fill multiple paragraphs, I would rather just do a video. Now, obviously, not every comment's going to do this because there's lots of comments that, for lack of a better term, I think they ask questions that people don't really care about, or this is a topic that I don't care about, or whatever. So this isn't going to happen all the time. But this comment, I think, was illustrative of a lot of things. So about a year ago, I made a video titled "My Son Committed Suicide Because of Circumcision." It didn't get a lot of press. It was in the BBC in a couple places, but basically an English-born Canadian. So he'd been born in the UK, but he lived in Canada for a while. Apparently he had phimosis, and he was told that he should get circumcised, which he did when he was in his early 20s. And it was very detrimental to his sexual health. He basically saw all of his sexual pleasure was gone. And he ended up committing suicide. He wrote a letter to his mom basically saying why, and that destroyed his life, and so on and so forth. So, and I will say that people's reactions to getting circumcised do vary. So not everyone who gets circumcised obviously has something that profound of a negative reaction, but he did. So I uploaded that video over a year ago, and most of the people on my channel were either libertarians who listened to me a long time and they gave me a lot of slack on this, or they are receptive to the ideas of intactivism and anti-circumcision, because I think libertarians are receptive to a lot of anti-circumcision arguments, not all of them, but many. And then I have a lot of people who've come to the channel because of the anti-circumcision and the foreskin restoration stuff who are highly sympathetic. So I don't get a ton of negative comments, and I did get a negative comment. And what was good is it kind of encapsulates all of the anti-circumcision, pro-circumcision arguments in just a paragraph or two. Now, obviously, he doesn't go to all the detail, but he kind of lists everything. I don't know for sure if this guy is not a subscriber, but I get the impression that he is searching videos on circumcision and foreskin and just kind of, I don't want to say spamming, but because it's not spam, but he's trying to make an argument, but that he's engaged in a battle of ideas to defend circumcision. So I'm going to try and maybe I'll put a copy of his question in the description. Let's see. First, let me do a little paperwork here. I always got to make sure that the stream is working and that anything that I want to paste in it is there as well. So just give me a second. It's a pretty short comment, but he kind of touches all of the main points, so it was definitely worth doing a response to. There we go. 8 people watching. Awesome. Basically famous. Let's see. Little feedback audio here for a second. But I recommend people go back and rewatch that video. That is a good video, I thought. After I made it, I actually met somebody who had firsthand knowledge. When the gentleman committed suicide, he wrote a letter to his mom, and they disclosed parts of the letter. They didn't make the whole thing public. And I've since met and talked to a gentleman who was able to see. He's much more active in the intactivist community than I am. He's a higher up. I guess you could say that's not really a centralized organization, but he's more involved than I am and has been for longer. And he said he's read the entire letter and that he definitely had lost all of his feeling. Now, this guy in the UK, he actually had true phimosis, which is it's one of those pro-circumcision arguments where there's a grain there, because phimosis is a real thing. Phimosis is something that you can develop. Now, the extent that it's a real problem, I think, is debatable. I have friends who are adults who have phimosis, and they're fine. They have no problem. They've never had a problem. They never get infections. They have sexual pleasure. When it comes to function, phimosis seems to be a pro and a con situation. There are definitely cons to having phimosis. You can't retract the foreskin behind the head, and that does restrict some of your options. However, because the head is fully covered all the time, it tends to be very, very sensitive, which in its own right gives you other options. So when I've met guys who were had phimosis, very little stimulation went a very long way. So it can be a problem. I don't know what percentage of guys with phimosis is it actually a problem. In the United States, anybody who has it, if they have a doctor, there's a very good chance that their doctor is going to um, push them to get circumcised, at least most doctors. This may be changing slowly, but uh, in the United States, I think most doctors would want to push you to get it done. Um, and sadly, if you do want to fix it, you don't typically need to get circumcised. There are any kind of manual stretching techniques, or even there's devices, a product called Phimocure, stuff like that, which will actually fix it for you without surgery. So circumcision is by far the most radical way to address the problem, assuming that it is a problem, which I don't think is always the case. But so this gentleman had phimosis, and if that's true, then it would have been extremely painful probably for him to be fully exposed, because guys with phimosis have typically the most sensitive um, glands, and when it gets exposed suddenly, it's going to be too much. So right now I'm making a copy of this comment just so that everyone can read what I'm talking about. I'm going to update the description so you can see it. Comment, so you can follow along. It's a short enough comment that you know it's not that hard to read, but just so people don't have to go back if they don't want to. Although that is a good video and I recommend people see it. So let's go save. Excellent. Should be good. Preach. Hello, definitely famous. What's famous? Oh yeah, because I had 8, now I have 11. Hey Luke, hey Arthur, nice to see you guys. So let's go. This is going to be fairly quick. Description. Feel free to ask questions. I'll get to them in a second. Um, so if the dude committed suicide because he was circumcised, he had some very serious psychological problems. Yeah, that could be. How many of them are related to getting circumcised or not? We don't really know. It's definitely possible. With the many serious okay, this is the interesting part. With the many serious problems and illnesses such as cancer, world hunger, poverty, and the threat of nuclear war in the Middle East and North Korea, to worry about foreskin is a sign of serious psychotic behavior. For cultural, religious, and health reasons, circumcision has been going on for almost 4,000 years with very few negative consequences. I wonder, 70 to 90% of American guys are circumcised and they live normal, healthy, happy lives. In the USA, uncircumcised dudes are in a minority, and they generally have inferiority complexes and fear of rejection by women who overwhelmingly prefer circumcised men. Okay, I'm ready to get all the hate responses. I don't really give a shit. Let's get a life. And actually, he made that comment a year ago, and I don't think anybody replied. I either didn't see it or I wasn't able to reply right away, so I actually did not reply until like a week ago. So he didn't get a flood of negative comments. I mean, that video has a couple thousand views, but there's not a ton of traffic on it. So I did reply to him subsequently. We had a little bit of a back and forth. But I like this comment because it does touch on almost all the arguments that people make in favor of circumcision, some of which are a little, they're interesting. I find them interesting. Common knowledge. Hello, Glenn. Evening. All right, so let me go with this. So the first thing he says here is actually I find pretty interesting. Obviously, the psychological stuff, but with many serious problems and illnesses such as cancer, world hunger, poverty, and the threat of nuclear war in the Middle East and North Korea, to worry about foreskin is a sign of a serious psychotic behavior. Now, what you're describing there is you think that there's a misalignment of priorities. That whatever problems there are with circumcision, and later he admits that there are some, although he's vague as what they are, that it shouldn't be something that that becomes a major issue or major campaign. Now, if you want to say that, that's fine. That doesn't make somebody who doesn't agree with your evaluation system a psychopath, right? That's not psychotic. You just don't agree with it. But this is very interesting. Now, I would agree that, of all the issues that we could list, I can think of many that I would consider, even for me personally, as invested I am in the topic, more important than circumcision. I think abortion has a strong argument for this. Things like war, even many like the Fed, taxes, these are things that maybe aren't as invasively personal, but yet are so powerful in their effects on net that they deserve more attention potentially. So I'm not arguing by taking a position on any given topic, whether it's circumcision, Gamergate, SJWs, racism, trans rights. Just to take an issue on any of those doesn't imply that you're saying this is the most important thing or this is the only thing. And I would never assert that. I don't know that there are any activists who do assert that. What's interesting here is the logic here would be, well, actually, COVID-19, cancer, North Korea nuclear war, these aren't really the biggest problems because the biggest problem is that after the Big Bang, the universe faces entropy death. One day we'll have the great fizz and all matter will break down in the universe. Or if you don't want to look that far into the future, at one point the sun will go red giant and vaporize the earth. And so really talking about any of these other problems is just stupid and getting our priorities in the wrong place because that is the biggest problem, and every other problem is basically irrelevant in that comparison. And again, I don't really see this in any other topic. Many people know that I'm a crusader, or I have a vested interest in communal showers. I've done a lot of videos about it. I'm active in that. And I would fully admit that communal showers are not the most important issue or it's the top issue. I'm gravitated because I find it interesting and also because I didn't see that there was any kind of movement out there. There weren't any people calling out or trying to change where the cultural tides are going there. So I thought, if someone's got to do it, it might as well be me. But that's not to say that I think communal showering is the most important issue that faces America or the world. Um, and again, I don't really see people use this argument for any other topic. You could basically put on anything that people have an issue, any kind of stance that they take, and say, well, there's something that's more important, therefore you're a psychopath. Okay, the psychotic part just makes no sense. But you could just say, well, I think that there are other bigger issues. Fair. That doesn't mean it's invalid to point out, a quote lesser issue. And I will say that, something like, and I don't know why it is, but abortion is always the thing that's pulled up. I don't know if that's because people assume that most intactivists are pro-choice. And I think that assumption is largely correct. I think most intactivists probably are pro-choice. I'm not sure why. Logically, that doesn't make sense to me, but that may be the case. I don't know if the people who retort that are even aware of that. Seems to be this common conception. And so I've seen many times where people will argue with intactivists and say, yeah, but what about abortion? Well, okay, abortion is a real issue, and I have a stance on abortion. I've made many videos about it. I've talked about it. But, the pro-life movement has its champions. It's a very popular movement, and it's making progress. And I support that, and I will help the pro-life movement to the extent that I can. But ending circumcision is something that it's kind of in a neonatal stage of a movement. It's not as popular. It's not as widely spread. It's not as condemned. Most people are still making excuses for circumcision. So I think that it's the marginal impact that a person can make is larger, and it's still a real issue. Now, killing a baby, I would argue, is worse than circumcising a baby. And the way that they kill them also is quite horrifying. Although there's an argument there because it's dead, its life is over, its suffering ends. With circumcision, its potential for the suffering to go on is much greater, and it could last a lifetime. And there are people whose lives maybe aren't ruined. In some cases, people's lives are ruined, but whose lives they suffer for their entire lives to some extent, to a greater or lesser extent. So, I would tend to say that I do think that abortion is a quote unquote bigger issue or a larger rights violation. But that doesn't mean that circumcision is just okay. It's not. It is a problem.